Well, hello, hello. Hi, Shari. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thanks for
And
having me.
just to give a little bit of context, Shari is a recently added speaker to Nota Inclusion, and she's a lot of things under her belt coming up next year. And so we're going to talk about all of them. But I just thought about this question, Shari, when we just joined this link, and you're launching a book next year about called Qualify, how
Mhm.
competency checking and race collide at work.
Right.
And before we go there, like how are you feeling? Because I feel that we're in a time and space where like this is a topic that needs to be covered again. And so I'm just curious, like, as you're getting ready to launch and bring this into the world, like, what are your feelings right now?
Yeah, I guess I feel a duty and an obligation. I feel that there are people before us who worked really, really hard for me to get, as far as I've gotten. And it wasn't by accident. It wasn't just by my hard work. It was because a lot of people worked hard and put their lives on the line to make it possible for me during not just during civil rights movement, but prior to that. And so I feel a duty and an obligation in this moment to pick up that baton and work as hard as I can to ensure that the doors of opportunity for people of color and Black folks don't close. And so I think that's how I feel. Mhm.
Yeah, and I it's also good timing because we have, I mean, not just because it's Black History Month, but it's really a conversation that we should all be having now, right? Because it's become a topic of conversation that people don't want to have anymore, right? And we're
Well,
not there.
I will challenge that a little bit. I will say that I think that media has done a really poor job of reporting on the fact that the majority of corporations have not retreated from their diversity, equity, inclusion work,
Yeah. Oh,
and that the
that's
majority of public actually, when you explain the specifics to them, actually support the work. But there is a bit of a hysteria building that could create groupthink. And so, yes, there are some high profile organizations pulling back from the work, but I think it's incumbent on us to continue to show a way forward in the work.
mm. And I'm going to add to that, and how, the future of how companies thrive is whether they have a community and sense of belonging or not.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's not up to being negotiated,
Mhm.
your employee base and the future of the workforce, if we even look at just the United States, is browner and
Yeah.
more diverse
It's
and
funny. The
intersectional.
future is now. I mean, that
Yeah.
workforce
No, yeah, yeah,
now
yeah.
more diverse and the consumer base and yeah, so yeah, right now.
Now. Okay, well, tell me a little bit about you, Shari. Let's start there.
Whoa, where to begin? So I tell people I began life as an attorney. I wasn't born a baby attorney, but I started my work life as an attorney. I did divorce and custody for victims of domestic violence. And then I did that for several years. And then I went and worked in Washington, D.C., and did advocacy for legal services attorneys. So, attorneys like I was an attorney as something called legal services attorney. And they're the folks who help people who do not have the financial ability to get legal services. And there is something called the Legal Services Corporation, which is like a quasi governmental agency. And so I moved to DC and worked for the National Legal Aid and Defender Association and supported legal services attorneys with funding, training, that kind of thing. And then I moved to New York and I ran a foundation for several years, and we did grant making related to legal services infrastructure. So, all told, I spent about a decade either practicing law, advocating with law, or funding legal related things. And then I tell people I joined the circus and I became a journalist, and I spent a decade as a news anchor around the country as a journalist doing the news. And then I left the news and became a nonprofit executive, consultant, and adjunct professor. So yeah, I've done a lot of things.
And what inspired, and we can't go into detail of the book, but just, what inspired you to write this specific book that's coming out next
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, so Qualified, How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work came about partly out of my lived experience and having these strange interactions with people in the workplace where people are questioning my competence, looking up to see if I really went to law school. I mean, these things really happen, just strange interactions. And then when I became a consultant, hearing the exact same things from Black folks around the country, particularly Black women who were finding themselves really marginalized in the workplace, question about their qualifications, challenge when they had senior roles. And I thought, what is going on? How can it be that a person in the Midwest, a person in the Southwest, a person down south, up north, they're all hearing the same language directed at them, the same complaints directed at them? Like it was very weird. And so that sent me on a journey to really dig deeper. And as a result, I came up with this concept called competency checking, which is the ways in which Black and other people of color are forced to prove again and again their competency and their right to be in spaces. And that led to me writing a book to not just identify the problem, but also come up with some solutions and some tactics for the pushback, which I kind of anticipated writing the book, the pushback to diversity, equity, inclusion. So yeah, it was lived experience. And then as a consultant for the last 4 years, it was hearing my clients' stories.
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying that you're having to like prove yourself and your competency, I mean, I'm sure everyone watching right now can start thinking about all the ways that they do that every day that
Yes.
you don't even notice.
And it happens to women too, women writ large. So white women, Black women, Hispanic, Asian women in general. But there is something about the interplay of anti-Blackness and questions around intelligence and ability that really rise to the surface. But yeah, everybody has an idea of what this feels like.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to go into some of the keynotes and workshops that you're offering for 2025. And I'm personally excited also that your book is coming out, because if you haven't worked with NODA before, there's when authors are coming out with books, there's deals and there's incentives and there's many ways that you can bring them in and be able to also create like a path for either what's it called, a book club or something that then
Mhm.
helps create even more community from the resource of the book and Shari's talk. And so we'll go there in a bit, Shari, but I want to talk about your first session, which is The Future is Diverse, How Your Business Can Win It. Tell me more.
Yes. Yeah. So for me, that session is really trying to contextualize for businesses and nonprofits that the future is diverse. So how are you going to win the future? And what I really want folks to understand is that this is no different than, say, a company expanding to another country, right? When you expand to another country, you have to consider language, culture, access, inclusion, diversity, equitable pay. You have to consider all those things. And so let's look at the modern workforce as a miniature of international expansion, right? So in your workforce, you have all of this representation. And how do you do that where you are expanding your market, you're expanding your expertise, and ultimately it's how you're going to win the future. I tell people, do you want to be Blockbuster or do you want to be Netflix, or do you want to be what's after Netflix, right? And that requires creative thinking, a diversity of people to give you that insight. So winning the future is not a retreat from the reality of a diverse world and a diverse workforce. It's leaning into that. So that is really designed to help businesses understand this from that perspective and give them the tools and intellectually help them kind of build the bridge to understand why this is, important of winning the future.
Yeah. And then let's talk about the competency checking, uncovering a tool of systemic racism. I'm assuming this is also very aligned to the book launch.
Yes, so that is specifically with the book. So people want to know, what is competency checking? How does it show up in my workplace? And how can I interrupt it? And how can I change it? So this is really tied to the book. And that keynote really helps hone in on the ways in which uh, the pipeline is blocked and it's not broken, so it's that kind of thing, and showing you, and I may have one on the pipeline being blocked and not broken, but the competency checking really hones in specifically on what are the elements of competency checking, how are they showing up in your workplace in ways you may not be aware of, how do you disrupt it, and how can you change it.
This is so timely for everyone watching. I know your company needs this. I'm not even gonna. I just know it. I'm already thinking you're sharing this workshop, and I'm like, yeah, I can already think of who I need to send this to. Yeah, and then I like your next session because I think many people think this, and you just reiterated it at the beginning of our conversation of how DI is not dead. It can be dead. That's the thing. It's like impossible. I mean, that you can't just like retreat from it. And so, tell me a little bit more about what is DEI dead? What does the future hold for anti-racism work and DEI does?
Yeah, so that talk is designed to give companies an intellectual framework to go forward. A lot of people are very confused, like we were just talking about, right? There's all this fog of war, confusion, people saying, "Oh, don't do that, you can't do that," and it's actually not true. And as I say to people, diversity is a fact, so it can't be
Yeah.
dead unless all diverse people were dead. Inclusion is necessary because inclusion is how you do your work. And having equitable pay, equitable workplace, these are all foundational principles of a workplace. And so let's disaggregate them from what the misinterpretation that people have given them, and let's recontextualize them in the concepts of what does it mean for your workplace to succeed. And then also it is pulling off the book too, because it gives strategies for companies to figure out how to fight back if they should be attacked for the work, if they should meet resistance. How can they approach that? How can they approach that in a fair way? How can they approach that in a way that it maintains the integrity of their work? And also, how do they use their status, specifically for-profit businesses, in a free enterprise society to say, hey, we don't want people interfering with our workplace and what it means for us to have a robust, thriving workplace. That's actually an interference in capitalistic principles, actually. So really giving businesses kind of the firepower that they need and the contextual understanding that they need to continue to go forward with the work.
Yeah, I can see this being a session for managers where you would just see suite executives, because everyone should have, it's everyone's role. It's not just one department's role.
Exactly, and also giving contextual understanding. There is some historical contextual work which helps ground why you're doing it, right? So, and I think a lot of times when we do DEI work, we jump into the what, and we don't properly help people understand the why, meaning the ground of which they're standing. So, yeah, that's what.
Especially now that people are getting confused on whether there is even a why. I
Right.
mean, yeah. So this is a great session. Talk to me a little bit about leading in living color. So it says overcoming
Yeah.
barriers for leaders of color.
Well, again, through my consulting work, what I was hearing over and over from leaders of color is that they were meeting so much resistance.
Yeah.
They were meeting resistance. They would get these jobs, everything seems, and then they're a witch, or I tell people they're a witch in the fairy tale sense, not in the Wiccan sense, and they're not. And so what I wanted to do was create a session that both speaks to the issues that leaders of color, excuse me, I'm recovering from bronchitis, that leaders of color find themselves meeting, and also highlighting for companies the ways in which they may be unaware that they are hampering both the development and the success of leaders of color.
Mm.
And I talk about this as like Alice's adventures in Wonderland or through the looking glass. You know, leaders of color find themselves in positions that are so strange and so peculiar as to almost be unbelievable. I mean, some of the things that people have told me. And so I really want to both recognize and support the experience that leaders of color are having, but also provide actionable solutions for their companies as to what does it really mean to onboard a leader of color, especially in a team that has never had a leader of color, may never have had a woman, um, in a workplace that is really rooted in kind of the great man theory of leadership, which is generally white male leadership. How do you prepare a team and that leader to succeed?
Yeah, these are conversations you don't really, I mean, even see people having at all. They just assume,
No,
there's no difference, but there is. And
there's a difference.
as a Latina myself, I get to meet a lot of like Latina and Latino leaders, and it's like counted. I mean, the data that shows about Latinos in C-suite positions or director roles. I mean, it's literally 1%, and I get to see, being friends with a lot of directors, them moving and companies taking them. And so, if you don't really make space to have these conversations and understand how to accommodate, make sure they thrive, they're going to leave.
Yeah, they're going to leave, but then also they end up going to places that also don't support them. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's true.
really a
Yeah.
hard situation that we're putting leaders of color in, and we're not setting them up for success. And it's not it's not that there's something intrinsically wrong with them or their leadership. It
Yeah.
really comes down to how we perceive who is a leader, who we think should lead us, and our reaction when we are confronted by leadership that does not conform to that. So that's
Yeah.
uncovering that.
Yeah, you have a really good session I want to talk about next called Color Blinded, the
Yeah,
pitfalls of colorblind solutions. I think this
yeah.
goes so well with the last session you just talked. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so colorblinded is really trying to get at the idea that, hey, if we just have a colorblind society, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And what data tells us is that colorblind solutions end up favoring white people. They actually do not promote a more fair and equitable society. And that has to do with the fact that our society is not equitable. We don't live in a race neutral society. And the example I give in the book, and an example I give in other places too, so is the World War II GI Bill. So the World War II GI Bill had a housing benefit, and the World War II GI Bill was race neutral. It didn't say you had to be black or white to get the benefits. You didn't have to be white, but 1.2 million Black folks served in World War II, and a scant percent, I mean, it might be 0.02% or some ridiculously small number, were ever able to get the GI housing loan. And the reason was because the system in which they lived was not race neutral, right? At that time, there was Jim Crow, and then there was a big racial disparity. So what we know from that example is that you can put race neutrality in, but when you put it in a system that still has race-based assumptions, it doesn't work. And not only does it not work, it inures to the benefit of the majority and continues disparities. So really kind of exploding the myth that a colorblind system, because there's a quote, and I forget the author, but color blindness just makes us blind to the impact of racism. It doesn't
Oh,
change racism.
yeah. That is so powerful. It's true. And we're going to need it more next year. Okay, let's talk about the myth of qualifications. This one's also tied to your book, but you talk about how anti-Blackness skews hiring practices. So I like the angle of it because I think you cover, different departments. It's like the sessions for leaders and executives. There's the sessions for all employees, and then there's the sessions for hiring managers and HR and people managers. And tell me a little bit more about this session.
Yeah, the myth of qualifications is pernicious in our society. So, the myth of qualifications is really designed to help us rethink these long list of qualifications we have for hiring positions. Are they even relevant? Why do we think we have to have them? And so there is some historical contextual work that happens in that, where we talk about the fact that the qualifications start to shift in the United States depending on who's seeking entry. Okay, so this is common knowledge, but you know, the college admissions test, the SAT, comes out of something called the military intelligence test. And the military intelligence test was designed to prove that white Anglo-Saxon Protestants were smarter than Jewish people. Like literally, that's not made up. That's it. The military intelligence test, one of its main features was designed to do that. The SAT is based on that. So we start using aptitude tests in college admissions once Jewish people start seeking more entry into elite universities. So it's a case of the out group trying to enter and the in group setting up barriers. So when we think about qualifications, we think they're neutral, they're meritorious, but most of the qualifications we have established come from our attempts to keep outsiders out and keep benefit from insiders. And two things can be true. You can want to have people who are good at their jobs and who are good in school, but we also know that having excellent grades or not having excellent grades is not necessarily an indicator of success. And when it was a community of the same, predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, the requirements around success looked very different. And they began to shift and become higher and more complicated each time outgroup people sought admissions. So, seeking admission to the bar, you get the bar exam, medical school tests, licensing for plumbers really became an aptitude test designed to prevent other people from color getting into unions, into the trades. So, and people hear this say, well, you don't want any qualifications. That's not the issue. The issue is, in what ways are we and how are we still using qualifications, certain qualifications, as a barrier to keep people out, as opposed to something to understand the abilities of someone to do a job, right?
Sure.
And even skills-based hiring, you have to be careful with, because skills-based hiring says, hey, we're going to look at your skills and ability, but then I ask the question, who are you giving the benefit of doubt to? And who are you not? Right? So data tells us that white men with a criminal record have an easier time getting a job than Black men without a criminal record. So we still have to be careful even when we're doing skills-based hiring. So the myth of qualifications is really designed to help people understand how a lot of the things they think of as standard qualifications came to be, and how we could think of another way to get at that same question as to what we want to know a person's ability to do the job. Because for most of our history, people did jobs by learning to do them. That's how they did jobs. They
Yeah.
apprenticed, they learned, that's how they did that. But those systems also had a lot of inequity because they wouldn't take people of color into those apprenticeships. And so every time this system is opened, there's a reaction to close it with more qualifications, but only for some people, not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I just moved to the States to finish high school as a junior, and I had no idea what an SAT was. I mean, I heard about it, and it was junior year, which is when you're supposed to prepare and take it and et cetera. And I remember even seeing someone Latina that, feeling at a disadvantage because so many of my colleagues had, especially at a higher socioeconomic status, teachers and mentors and people that were preparing them for this test. And so you were, just in the even socioeconomic space, like you are at a disadvantage if you don't have the means and the resources to hire trainers. And yeah, this is so fascinating. Shari, you and I can keep going on and on. And I mean, you have so much. I mean, this is just like scratching the surface, really, of all the types of sessions that you have. And then what I love is that it's not just sessions like keynotes, but also workshops. And so, being able to offer that very hands-on, training. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you for coming in today and making space. I'm definitely going to make sure we meet again once your book is out.
Thank you.
But I will for sure from my end, let my clients know that this is coming out and this is that one shot that they get to get books and speaking together at a deal. And so, yeah, and I'm even just aside your book coming out, I think the work and the content and the sessions that you've curated and crafted are so needed.
Well, one thing I do want to say too, and just for folks to know, I really practice a non-shaming
Yeah.
type of training and keynoting. And so while the topics may be heavy, it is important for me to build intellectual bridges that everybody can walk across to understand the content. So, my sessions are not designed to, shame people or, anything like that, but really to enlighten and connect the dots. So,
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, that's what we do too. We always make sure we work with speakers that don't do, because this is about, I think a lot of it is built like bridge building and and learning how to have conversations, and even just you sharing now the very high level outlines of your sessions. I'm sure it's giving people that are watching us space to think about and already start seeing how they can change that internally, or some of the qualifications that they've built that are exclusive or non-inclusive of, I mean, this is why this work is so important, because it's about providing a framework, but then also a perspective and a lens that people need to have or gain so that things are more equitable, right?
absolutely, absolutely. It inures to all of our benefit.
Yeah.
Every advancement around equality in the United States has helped every single group in the United States. And that includes white men, that includes white women, that includes everyone. And so every time we move to advance equity, we all win.
Yeah, I agree. We all win. Well, thank you, Shari. And like I said, I'm excited for your book launch and to be able to partner this coming year. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.